I wanted to step in, to say something, but I knew one wrong move could make things spiral. My wife, still calm but firm, slowly reached for her ID, not in a threatening way, just enough to show she had nothing to hide. "I need you to lower your weapon," she said, voice steady. "You're pointing a gun at a sworn law enforcement officer." That's when it hit him. His expression shifted, not to fear, but to confusion, maybe even panic. It was clear he hadn't done his homework. He didn't know who she was, or maybe he didn't think a sheriff would look like her. But even with that moment of hesitation, he still didn't lower the weapon. Then, almost on cue, more HOA board members started arriving. I don't know if someone called them or if they were already nearby, but their presence added another layer of tension. Some looked shocked, others looked nervous, like they knew this wasn't going to be easy to explain later. Parker's pride was on the line now, and it felt like he was too far in to back out gracefully. I could feel the air getting tighter, every second stretching longer than the last. My heart was pounding, and all I could think was, how far is he willing to go to prove he's in control? Because my wife wasn't going to back down, not now, not ever. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get more intense, another twist changed everything. One of the HOA board members, an older guy named Mr. Klein, stepped forward. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him. He'd been part of the HOA for years, quiet, level-headed. But what he said next shocked all of us. "I told you not to push this," Klein said, looking straight at Parker. "She warned us last month." That one sentence hit like a bomb. My wife didn't flinch, but I could see it in her face. She knew exactly what he meant. Turns out, this wasn't the first time the HOA had been warned. A few weeks back, after repeated complaints about Parker's aggressive behavior, my wife had privately reached out to the board, asking them to step in before things got out of hand. They'd assured her it would be handled quietly. Clearly, it wasn't. And now, that hidden history was boiling over in front of the whole neighborhood. Parker turned to Klein, confused and angry. "You knew?" he snapped. "And you didn't tell me." That's when the real power shift began. Parker wasn't just losing control of the situation. He was losing control of his own people. Some board members started backing away. Others exchanged nervous glances. It was obvious the HOA had been covering for him, and now, under the weight of public scrutiny, the truth was seeping out. Still, his hand stayed on the gun. Now the conflict wasn't just between him and my wife. It was between him and the very system that had quietly enabled him. The lies, the silence, the fake authority, it was all unraveling right there on our street, and with the tension thicker than ever, no one knew what Parker might do next. Still, his hand stayed on the gun. Now the conflict wasn't just between him and my wife. It was between him and the very system that had quietly enabled him. The lies, the silence, the fake authority, it was all unraveling right there on our street, and with the tension thicker than ever, no one knew what Parker might do next. Everything felt like it was hanging by a thread. Parker's eyes were darting between my wife, the HOA board, and the growing crowd of neighbors. The silence around us wasn't calm, it was tight, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to break. My wife stood firm, still calm, still in control. And then, with one quiet move, she did something no one expected. She slowly reached into her back pocket, pulled out her badge, and held it up high for everyone to see. "Sheriff Daniels," she said, voice clear. "Put the weapon down. You're out of line, and you're not law enforcement." Parker froze. You could see it. The exact second he'd realized just how badly he'd messed up. His hand finally dropped, gun lowering to his side. The crowd around us let out a small, collective breath, but it wasn't over yet. Just as things started to settle, a car rolled up fast, tires crunching the gravel. Out stepped a plainclothes detective, someone from Internal Affairs. Apparently, my wife had filed a formal complaint after the last run-in, and IA had been watching. The whole thing had been under quiet investigation. What none of us knew was that Parker wasn't just overstepping. He wasn't even supposed to be acting in any enforcement role. He had no official clearance, no authority. He was pretending. That was the final twist. He wasn't even a real security officer. The HOA had hired him off record, under the radar, to keep things in order. The board's faces went pale. There were going to be consequences, not just for Parker, but for everyone who backed him. And just like that, the silence was broken not with violence, but with truth. And that turned out to be the one thing Parker wasn't ready for. You won't believe what happened to us when an HOA cop decided to pull a gun on my wife. Little did he know, she's actually the sheriff. It started as a normal day, just a routine encounter with someone we thought had authority over our neighborhood. But what we didn't expect was for this self-proclaimed enforcer to take things to a whole new level. Tensions were high, and before we knew it, a gun was pointed right at her. But that's not the crazy part. The real twist came when he had no clue who she really was. I watched in shock as my wife stayed calm, not a single ounce of fear in her eyes. It's not every day you see someone so composed when facing a weapon, especially when you realize she's not just another neighbor. She's the one who holds the badge, the one who's been trained for moments just like this. But even with all that, things didn't go as smoothly as you might think. Was the HOA cop just having a bad day, or did he genuinely believe he had the upper hand? What happens next will leave you on the edge of your seat. You won't believe how this standoff plays out. Stay tuned for the rest of the story. To fully understand what led up to that moment, I need to give you some context. We've lived in this neighborhood for years. It's quiet, peaceful, and honestly, we never had issues with the HOA or their rules. But lately, things have been changing. New officers were brought in, and with them came an aggressive attitude that made us feel uneasy. We've always followed the rules, paid our dues, and respected everyone's space. But for some reason, this new guy, let's call him Officer Parker, had it out for us. It started with small things. He'd stop by to question why our mailbox wasn't the right color, or why the grass in our front yard wasn't perfectly manicured. All petty stuff, really. But then, one afternoon, it escalated. My wife, who's not only a sheriff, but also a very composed person, was just out front, enjoying a cup of coffee, when Parker showed up again, demanding she move her car off the street. She wasn't blocking anyone, but he was relentless. His tone was condescending, and it was clear he didn't like being questioned. But when my wife calmly told him she wasn't going to move the car, he lost it. I never expected things to go as far as they did. He had his hand on his gun, and in a split second, it was aimed right at her. But she stood her ground, unshaken. At that moment, everything seemed to freeze. Officer Parker was standing there, his hand tight on the gun, his eyes locked on my wife, as if he was waiting for her to flinch. The tension between them was so thick you could almost feel it in the air. What struck me as strange was how calm my wife remained. She didn't look scared, didn't raise her voice, and didn't make any sudden moves. She just stared back at him, almost as if she were trying to understand what was happening, why this was happening. And that's when it hit me. Parker had no idea who he was dealing with. I had been trying to piece together what was driving him. Sure, he was new, but I couldn't understand why he'd push things this far over something as simple as a parking spot. Was he power-hungry? Or did he have a personal vendetta? I kept wondering if this was about more than just rules or authority. My wife, though, was beginning to piece it together faster than I was. She'd seen this kind of behavior before, just not in a neighborhood. It reminded her of some of the worst officers she'd dealt with during her time on the force, people who let their badges get to their heads, who thought they could intimidate anyone. Still, the biggest question loomed. What would Parker do next? Would he back down, realizing the situation was spiraling out of control? Or was he so far gone in his need to assert power that he wouldn't care who he was threatening? The whole situation felt surreal, and I knew things were about to get even worse before they got better. The longer the silence stretched, the more intense everything became. Neighbors started peeking out from behind curtains, some even stepping out onto their porches. You could feel the weight of their stares, but no one dared step in. Parker's hand didn't budge, and my wife hadn't moved either. I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was reading his body language, watching for any shift, any twitch that might turn this from a standoff into something far worse.